Hey, it's TDA, and today I want to share my thoughts on Terrascape with you. I recently posted a video where I completed one of the first few levels and have since then completed the entire game, so it is time for a proper review. Now, let me start with the basics. Terrascape is essentially a puzzle game in which you build an ever-expanding town. You do so by placing down buildings, which gives you various points depending on their environment. This means that placing certain buildings next to, say, a river will get you more points than placing it in the middle of a forest, while another building, let's say a lumberjack, might get you more points in that same forest instead. Now, so far that is pretty straightforward, but you can also get more points for placing certain buildings close to each other. Now, this is where it gets more complicated, because if you do that in a specific pattern, these buildings will actually merge together and then form an entirely new building instead. Now, that new building might interact differently with your other buildings than whatever buildings it was made out of. So if you want to maximize your score, you do need to consider if merging your buildings is actually something you want to do. Merging buildings together might also provide you with new items to place down, or special rewards like changing the terrain around it, or tools you can use to manipulate the terrain. That in turn might open up new areas to build that were previously inaccessible, or you might be able to optimize the area for some future expansion. In several of the game modes, but not all of them, you can get more buildings to place down by drawing cards from a particular deck. Each deck has a specific theme, like for example food, culture or housing. And each deck contains 4 different buildings, but you start out with just having one unlocked. As you gather points with your first few buildings, new buildings will unlock and give you access to that. Not only does it mean that you need to plan ahead a little bit, it also helps you with easing you into the game initially by not overwhelming you with all the choices that you might get later on. Unlocking more decks and more buildings in these decks does increase the difficulty quite a bit, because every time you draw from a deck you get buildings at random. Since you need to score points to actually earn more draws from a particular deck, you are also forced to start placing down buildings possibly slightly before you have everything that you're looking for. So there's pretty much a random factor in there to keep things interesting. Scoring points by using buildings does not just upgrade the deck that those buildings belong to, but as you gather more points you can also upgrade your main building, and that will allow you to unlock more decks. Several of these decks actually interact with each other as well to form more complex patterns that you can then use to merge your buildings. Now this is actually a nice way to keep things fresh, as different combinations of decks give you different playstyles. So how do you actually win the game? Well, that depends on the game mode that you're playing on. The Kingdom mode is basically a sandbox that has all the different decks available. You can pick how hard you want your map to be and just start building away and see how high of a score you can get. Now, I personally like having a bit of a more explicit goal to my games than that, but I can see how this might be fun to just chill out casually after a long day of work, for example. The second mode the game offers are the scenarios. Each scenario offers a set of missions that you need to complete in order to win that specific scenario. Each scenario does use a specific set of decks, and the first few scenarios seem mostly meant to teach you how to play the game, as the maps and decks are very straightforward. The scenarios do contain 2 different types of challenges to complete. One set is required to actually finish the level, while the second one is optional. However, once you've done that first set, you're probably going to have completed most of the bonus scenarios already anyway, so I'm not entirely sure why the developers made this distinction, as well. Playing for another 5 minutes or so after you complete the first set, you'll probably be done with the second set as well. Now, for some reason there's only 5 scenarios right now, and although they are quite fun to play, I would have liked to see a few more here, especially considering not all of the decks are actually used in these scenarios. Then the third and probably most interesting game mode is the Puzzle Terrace, which is a string of increasingly difficult challenges. Now in these levels you actually get a fixed set of buildings right out of the gate, and that is all the buildings you're going to get. Now in order to win the level, you'll have to figure out how to place these buildings or merge them together to optimize your points, as you will need to target a specific score. Now there's 30 of these levels, and although the first few are very straightforward, some of the later ones actually took me several tries with focused attention to complete, so these things are not necessarily all that easy. Still, I wouldn't say these puzzles are particularly hard, but you will definitely not be able to complete them by just randomly placing down buildings, so it's a nice mix between getting some challenge and not being too frustratingly hard at the same time. Now, if you like your puzzle games a little harder, then I would suggest you try the weekly challenge. Now, similar to the puzzle terrace, this game mode gives you a specific set of buildings to work with, and your task is to get as many points as you can. But the weekly challenge comes with a leaderboard, so this gives you an idea on how your score compares to the best of the world in that particular week. Now, this gives the game some replayability as well after you finish the other puzzles, and getting the high score on this particular mode is not going to be easy at all. More in general, the visuals in this game are pretty decent, especially if you zoom in, but in reality you're probably going to be zooming out most of the time to get a good overview of the map. The music is nice and relaxing, nothing special there, and I didn't encounter any bugs while playing, so again, no complaints for me there. It took me about 12 hours to complete all the challenges in the game and a few tries on the weekly challenge on top of that. Now, compared to some of the other games I've played on the channel, that is obviously not a very long time, but it's also worth noting that this game is priced a little bit more friendly than some of the other games that I've played. If it is worth the price, that is obviously up to you, but if you like this type of puzzle game slash city builder, it's worth checking out at least. Right now I think the game is actually on a sale as well, so it's about 10 euros or whatever that equivalent of that is in your country, so it's not the biggest slash on your budget. Now, if this all sounds good to you, but you want to see the game in action still, don't forget to check out my first look in which I play through one of the early levels. All in all, I think this is a nice little game that does what it wants to do pretty well. It's not going to provide you with years worth of playtime, but you know, every now and then it might be fun to play a game that you can actually, finish and then put away. Either way, I hope you found this review useful, and if you did, consider subscribing to the channel to see more. If you're still here, you are awesome, and I hope to catch you in the next one.